Welcome to the Conduit Deeper podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the Deeper Podcast. My name is Mo, executive pastor at Conduit Church, joined back with our lead pastor, Darren Tyler. I'm back from a trip.
Welcome home, buddy.
Out west. And because of your sarcastic remarks about me being away.
Did that reach, it reached you?
It reached me through several people.
I forget we're broadcasting.
They were like checking to make sure I was okay. I didn't fall off a horse, making sure I didn't get stung by a bee or ate something I shouldn't have with having an allergic reaction. People were very concerned. But yeah, so thanks for that.
Yeah, you came back feeling there's a lot more masculinity.
Oh, it was so fun,
emanating off of you right now.
It was so fun. We had a great time away out in Wyoming. Man, this is gonna be a little different. We're doing a podcast, kind of a wrap up of what we just recorded. So you're about to watch an interview with Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries, good friend of Conduit Church, good friend of Darren. That was, and I mentioned this in the podcast. That was the quickest 60-minute interview that I think we've ever done.
It was fast.
I mean,
but it was slow. It went fast because it was so good.
So fast because just the information was so good. I truly felt like we could have spent easily 2 to 3 hours just diving into each little topic in more detail. What was your takeaway from some of that?
Yeah, my takeaway is, Jeff. Many of our people actually know who his ministry is, Summit Ministries, because you've sent your teenagers there. And they're an organization that helps build a biblical worldview for young people. And they take on the toughest topics, sexuality, gender, things you're not allowed to talk about, socialism, that. And he wrote this book called, Why Christians Should Support Israel. And when I was speaking at the camp in July, I was like, I wonder what on earth motivated him to do that, because it wasn't the kind of issue that I would have thought that he would have tackled. And so I picked up the book. I'm like, dear Lord, this is maybe the most concise. It's exactly what you would expect from Dr. Myers, which is very well thought out, very clear treatise on why Christians should support modern Israel. And as we went through the last couple of weeks, I couldn't think of a better guy to bring on to, explain. You may not, you could listen to the whole thing, you still may not agree, but you cannot say that it's not a well thought out position that he's taken and written and giving to our kids. So if you're a parent, if you're a teenager, we weirdly have like teenagers that listen to this, which I'm still baffled by that. But hey, we love you guys. Like Lizzie Dodge, shout out. But this was one that I wanted to get to the real practical. Last week we went in depth, the deep end of the pool, theologically speaking, and this week it is the deep end of the pool on what Jeff calls the theopolitical issues on the ground. Not just in Israel, but here in America, and he did an incredible job.
Yeah, really good. If you're just stumbling on here and you want to catch this podcast and you're catching up to what we do here at Conduit, would you go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel? Maybe leave a comment with some thoughts or maybe even a question about the topic. Also, go visit Summit Ministries. I think it's .org. I need to double check that. But you can for sure find them at Summit Ministries on YouTube. They have their own channel with a ton of resources as well. And so this is our interview with Dr. Jeff Myers.
Of all the topics that you guys are hitting, and you're hitting the hard ones, gender, AI, sexuality, what on earth inspired you to take the amount of time to write a book about why Christians should care about Israel?
Yeah, well, let me give you a little of the background. I had traveled to Israel like many people. I had a wonderful time there, seeing the sights, walking where Jesus walked. And I had the opportunity to go to the war. Just, I think 3 months after the war started, in October 7th of 2023. And for those who've forgotten what happened in the last 2 years, Hamas, which is the ruling group in this little area called Gaza, super small, 3 or 4 miles wide, 20 miles long. They went across the border into Israel and slaughtered people who work at these little farms called kibbutz. These are the peace-loving, hippie Israelis, the ones who were most sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And they slaughtered them, raped them, mutilated them in front of their families in such a horrifying display of inhumanity that Israel, having been patient with these kinds of attacks for decades, finally decided that's enough. Hamas has to go. And so they responded with withering firepower and going there to be in the war. And I say you go to the war, you literally do. You can fly to Tel Aviv. We drove to Jerusalem, spent the night, got on a bus with our guard, and within an hour and a half, we were at the war. I mean, here's Gaza on one side with smoke rising from terrorist hideouts that are being targeted. On the other side, we hear the artillery going off. We're literally in the middle of it.
I was there right in January, so a couple months later after the.
Yeah,
I probably just missed you, honestly. But,
probably they're at a very close time.
Yeah,
and they take you to the place where there was a dance festival and young people were slaughtered by the hundreds. It's an unreal situation. But I spent a lot of time there talking with Israelis, talking with people in the IDF. I spent a lot of time with the IDF. Spent some time with Palestinians. Every time I've gone to Israel, I've spent a lot of time with Palestinians. I've been in the West Bank many, many times. And then I didn't obviously get to talk to anybody who is in Hamas, although there were many, many of the Palestinians who supported Hamas, which I just couldn't get my mind around because I don't see any way around the fact that Hamas is an apocalyptic rape and death cult. And to find that they had support is to show you how little Palestinians trust their corrupt leaders, that they would actually think that Hamas is doing a better job leading than the Palestinian Authority. In any event, I just started asking all my hard questions. I said, guys, I was with a guy who was an intelligence officer, and I said, okay, I'm going to just tell you right now the questions that every American young person is going to be asking. And I need you to be honest with me. And his level of honesty and the level of honesty of every single Israeli I met, the good, the bad, the ugly, compared to Hamas supporters and their dogged commitment to propaganda and not truth, convinced me that this is not an issue of moral equivalence. And it sent me home to ask, what's really happening here that's not being covered in the media? And that's what led to the book. Now, we cover, so my book this year covers transgender. It's called Raising Gender Confident Kids. Next year's book is on socialism. Should Christians be socialist? So it's not like we're tackling the easy topics. And with each book, by the way, I do media interviews. Friendly, hostile, doesn't matter. And I do Q&As with Summit students. On the issue, 7 to 8% of people maybe consider themselves transgender in Gen Z. 7% of people say Israel should be one of the top issues. 30% possibly of Gen Zers say that socialism is better than capitalism. You don't have to have a majority of people believing something in order for it to become the central issue that separates people from a biblical perspective. It just has to be a convinced, committed, vocal minority. So when issues come up like this that are difficult to solve, that get a lot of attention and that Christians feel they're on the fence about because they don't have a defensible position, that's when we jump into action and write books, in addition to the training programs that we have.
Jeff, you mentioned that Gen Z is the most anti-Semitic generation. in polling history, modern polling history. What is your take on the front lines? What is your take as to what the mechanism has been for that to be true? Like, what seed was planted over the past decade, maybe longer, more recently? Like, what's that hinge that's brought this about?
Let me get right to the heart of it. Having forsaken a biblical worldview, Americans have moved from a dignity mindset, which says that every human being bears the image of God, to a victim mindset that says that all of my problems are caused by people outside of myself. The victim mindset has led Gen Z to look around to try to identify scapegoats that they can blame for all the problems that they face. Israel's an easy target. 160 nations in the world regularly vote against Israel in the United Nations. Most American young people have become convinced that the United States is illegitimate, that it's a colonialist state that was imposed on the original inhabitants of the land and therefore should cease to exist. But they know it's not going to cease to exist. And so they look around for, well, who is a smaller target that we can pick on so that we can feel moral about our stance. I mean, if you realize, I don't think most young people they don't look to the church to try to figure out what salvation is. It's not like people are going to confession or going to church more. So they have to figure out some way to demonstrate their righteousness. And by going to an anti-Israel protest and saying we support the Palestinians, that's a super easy way to virtue signal that you are in fact a righteous person if you don't believe in Christianity. That's what ended up happening for a lot of young people. And I think they looked around and said, well, clearly there's a victim and a victor. There's an oppressor and there are the oppressed. If we want to be righteous, we have to be on the side of the oppressed. So we will identify the people who we want to pick on as being the oppressors. And therefore, we're morally justified in standing against them. And we can go to bed feeling that we're righteous people.
Not that I'm surprised, but that is an astute observation that really helps even me to synthesize a little bit of what we're experiencing in our city. But Jeff, not just in our city, but like in some of our parents as well that are Christians. I've been a little surprised. I feel like I got caught flat-footed a little bit. I've fully expected it from progressives, leftists. But there's this strain coming in that seems to be led by podcasters who can just say whatever they want without backing up with fact that's bleeding in. But one of the questions that we're getting from young kids, but also parents, is this is someone else's war. Why in the world, should we care about Israel and that war? Why would we even bother with that?
Yeah, can I mention something about the podcasters that you mentioned? You have to keep in mind that these podcasters you're referring to, and we all know who they are, we don't even need to name names, they make thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars by creating podcasts that are controversial. It feeds into a social media ecosystem that monetizes anger. This is no longer a secret. Everybody who's examined the algorithms, people who write on technology, all know that if you post something that is angry in your social media feed, it will get promoted 2.5 times more than any other post. And that to keep you engaged in social media, these algorithms are designed to present you things they know will make you mad. So I have all friends who are all across the political spectrum. And in fact, one of my former students, and it kept feeding me this stuff. He's anti-Israel and all this. It was very irritating. I just felt my ire starting to rise. And I thought, is this guy obsessed? Because has he ever posted on anything else? And so I went away from my feed to his actual page. And I noticed that 1 out of every 20 posts that he posts is about Israel. All the rest are about other things. But Facebook only shows me the ones they know will tick me off. So keep in mind that if you want to make a lot of money as a podcaster or social media influencer, you have to tap into things that you think are going to make people mad. And that's how you're going to get a lot of views. So you have to always discern what is the actual controversy that is taking place and what is the fake social media controversy that is taking place, so that people at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and these podcasters and social media influencers can make mega bucks off of you being ticked off. Okay, first thing I think we have to understand. Second, you asked the question about, hey, this is somebody else's war. Well, why should my generation care? Let me just give you a few reasons. First of all, Christians of all ages should care about the truth. If you don't care about the truth, just quit calling yourself a Christian and go, stop pretending. But you should care about the truth up against propaganda. And learning how to discern the difference between truth and propaganda is essential to be a human being in the modern age. And you are being propagandized if you have come to believe that Israel does not have a right to exist, or that it should be hated, or that its concerns should be diminished. Why am I saying that? The ultimate target is Israel. The ultimate target is the United States of America. Now, probably most people who are watching and listening, they develop their positions. They've never talked to an actual Palestinian. They've never talked to an actual Israeli. They probably don't even know any Jewish people. So it's easy for them to sort of offload the responsibility of the position they're taking because they don't have to humanize it. They don't have to actually talk to people who really are in this situation. I've spent time with all of those people. And I've distinguished sometimes between Jewish people and Israelis because Israel has people from, I think, 103 different countries, 103 different countries speaking 85 different languages. So it's truly a melting pot. It is democracy and it is vibrant. I mean, we have two major political parties in this country. There are 55 political parties in Israel for 9 million people. 15 of them have seats in the Knesset. So they argue amongst themselves all of the time. So you have to kind of distinguish between what it means to be Israeli and what it means to be Jewish, which is essentially to be a student of what we Christians call the Old Testament of the Bible. And then Palestinians. And when I talk to Palestinians who support Hamas, I will ask them this question. Is Israel the little Satan? 100% of them say yes, Israel is the little Satan. I ask them, so who's the big Satan? They kind of give this knowing smile and they say, it's the United States. That the attack on Israel is for the purpose of destroying Israel because they believe that will be the first domino in a series that will ultimately lead to the collapse of the United States. So I think we should care about it for that reason. A third reason to care is that this conflict that we're in Israel, by the way, you would have been talking about this differently last week. We need to talk about it this week because thanks to the efforts of Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and a handful of negotiators, and no thanks to the anti-Israel protesters, it looks like Hamas finally being isolated. And I can tell you, and if you want to ask in a moment why this is so significant for Hamas, but this is a theopolitical issue, not just a geopolitical one. You're dealing with the theology of a radical form of Islam that if it is allowed to persist without being countered with truth, will do tremendous damage to our world. And there is a false theology that is developed in the church that essentially decouples the Old Testament from the New Testament and makes Christianity incomprehensible. I don't know how people manage to forget that Jesus is Jewish. Jesus was born as a Jew. He lived as a Jew, died as a Jew. I believe he's coming again as a Jew. If you don't understand the Jewish roots of your faith, you don't really have a faith. So for those reasons, I think people of all generations should care deeply about what is happening in Israel.
Jeff, I love that you use this word theopolitical. this is the first time I'd ever heard of it. Not through your book.
I'm
was the
mad.
first time.
Yeah. I'm mad that I didn't come up with that. That was
such a
brilliant.
Yeah, it's
I
just a
didn't
brilliant
come up
framing.
with it, but I didn't come up with it. But if there's an intelligence officer who came up with it, his name cannot tell you. This will all be the public face of it.
Yeah, I'll give you credit, man. I'll send you the check.
It's a brilliant framing, and
I'll pass on the credit.
yeah, that's good. But it speaks to a bigger issue here, and I wanted to kind of get your insight. If you could maybe break that down just a little bit more, in the sense of, supporting Israel has become associated with being, a political right wing or conservative or red. We've distilled this down to such a simple delineation here. It's really more complicated than that. I think maybe it's more simple that the fact that it's not political, it's biblical. Maybe just dive into that theopolitical explanation as it pertains to Israel, politics, and the Bible.
Yeah. So by theopolitical, I mean, if you don't understand the underlying religious worldviews that are involved, you won't understand the problem. Most people think of international relations as geopolitical. We're fighting over this bit of land or that bit of land. When you do that, you misapprehend most of what is important to understand about what's actually happening in the world. For instance, if you genuinely believe that Nigerians who are Christians are being slaughtered because of climate change, then you are misunderstanding what's actually happening. Like, your worldview prevents you from being smart, and it forces you to be dumb. So we have to understand, first of all, Islam. What happened in Islam that gave rise to groups like Hamas? I think we also need to understand that this isn't a right-wing or a left-wing issue. I mean, what other issue are you going to have where Chuck Schumer, the senator from New York, and Donald Trump are going to agree that Israel has a right to exist and is important? On what other grounds are you going to find Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez agreeing with Marco Rubio that Israel has a right to exist? To say that it's right-wing is to simplify the issue to the point of absurdity. It simply isn't the case. In Israel, I don't know if you know this, but Israel was actually founded to be by some of the people came in who were Russian immigrants. They'd been kicked out of Russia because they were Jewish, and they came to Israel to establish a socialist utopia. It's not socialist anymore. It is free market for the most part. And that's because socialism fails whenever it's tried, and most people just continue to chase the failure into oblivion. The Israelis decided they don't want to chase the failure into oblivion. They want to be successful. But if you go there, you'll find people left-wing, right-wing, in the middle, all over the place. There's nothing about saying, oh, well, that's a right-wing issue that somehow solves this or gets us off the hook from having to think about it. But let me chase it a little bit further. I believe a biblical worldview that is a true biblical worldview speaks to every issue. It not only speaks to theology, but it also speaks to philosophy, ethics, science, psychology, sociology, politics, law, economics, history, because what you believe about God will determine what you believe about reality itself, which in turn will determine what you believe about what makes a good society, which in turn determines what kind of political, economic, and legal structure you should have. So what you believe about God begins that process. If you have a wrong view of God, then you might end up saying, oh, well, let's say somebody says there is no God. Okay, if there is no God, then whoever the most powerful person is, then is the God. They're the stand-in God. And who's the most powerful person in the United States? Whoever controls the biggest government in the United States. Therefore, politics is everything. The people who always say, you being political, are people who only believe in politics and therefore are easily triggered when anybody else has a comment on political issues. That's how I see it. I'm being pretty blunt today, I guess.
No, and we need to be blunt. I've been a pastor for 15 years, led a Bible study before that, taught about Israel many times. and have never had the amount of pushback and controversy, accusations that I've been compromised by the Israeli government, just stuff that if they weren't serious would actually be funny.
It would be funny, yeah, because these are dumb arguments. They're not even actually arguments.
Yeah,
it's a way of avoiding what's really at the core of it.
Right. So we actually had our mutual friend Michael Easley with us last week. Michael has been calling Conduit his home church for, I think it's like more entertaining for him than anything. I don't know. His and my friend.
I love that guy. When we do a show together, if I go off on something, I just see this grin kind of come across his face like, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Good luck.
We love him. And we talked a lot about replacement theology last week. Yeah. And I felt like I needed to use grok like on half the words he was using. But one of the questions that I have for you is, what is it about replacement the theology? Again, we've defined it in last week, but what is it that makes it so dangerous as a theology itself?
Yeah, we've got to be careful, Darren. I think with the way we use the term replacement theology. I would nuance it a little bit more because replacement theology essentially says the church replaces Israel, that Jews no longer matter. God divorced them, he kicked them out, and it's all about the church now. So what happens to Israel, what happens to Jews, God doesn't care. Supersessionism is a term that you're more likely to hear theologians use than replacement theology. Replacement theology it ends up being one of those labels that, people just stick on somebody else's head. But supersessionism is maybe a more common term. And there's a soft supersessionism, and then there's and I don't mean to be all nerdy about this, but a soft supersessionist would say, I'm all about the church. I'm a Christian. I want more people to come to Christ. But the Jews got here. We can't just ignore them. A hard supersessionist says, God divorced the Jews. And, there are 2 or 3 verses in the Old Testament where it says, I divorced you. And, it's in the context of God expressing his anger at the injustices being perpetrated by the Jewish nation of that time. It doesn't negate the covenant, but some people think that it does. I know one guy out there who took like 4 verses of the Bible, and I'm not even joking. He wrote 2 500-page long books about it, trying to justify this theology. Essentially, somebody who's a hard supersessionist does is uncouple the Old Testament and the New Testament. They say we call it the Old Testament for a reason. It's old. It's past. It's no longer relevant. Everything is about Jesus now. But you can't understand anything that Jesus said without understanding the culture in which he grew up and the scriptures that he accepted as true and promoted to his followers as true. If you uncouple the Old Testament, you no longer have a biblical theology. So I think that's really it makes a biblical worldview incoherent. I'm sorry, I'm kind of belaboring that point.
But no, it's helpful though, because I feel like what I'm experiencing, even like when someone says, do you support Israel? We have to, first of all, decide, what are we talking about? The people, the land, the nation? Like someone might be making a statement about the nation, and I might be responding about the land, and we're talking past each other with it. And the nuance between supersessionism, which in Israel is definitely a word that most of my Jewish friends know that word, and they find it very scary. And I guess when we're talking about like the podcasters that shall not be named, do you feel like most of them are coming at it from a supersessionist angle without even knowing it? Because I would be willing to bet, in the same way that they make fun of Ted Cruz because he didn't know what he was talking about, you could turn the tables and say, I don't think you know what you're talking about either. You're just kind of spouting stuff without even knowing the name of the theology. But would you Is there a nuance between that where we're hearing mostly supersessionist stuff coming out of those circles?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are verbally gifted, but they don't understand anything more than anyone else. They're just really good with words. And so we see a lot of people who are in that situation promoting that idea. Why do they do it? Some of it is, well, one of the podcasts who shot me named, who's a conspiracy theorist. This person quite literally believes all of the anti-Jewish propaganda that has been spreading for the last 100 years. There's another one who kind of takes the sort of, the kind of supersessionism that was very common in church history. I don't know if we are allowed to be honest about this, but Martin Luther was a jerk toward the Jews.
Yeah, we are. I talked about it on Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah, we're very loud. We usually name
John
names.
Calvin, John Calvin, not so much. If you look back, some, even Augustine, Ambrose, some of these guys, their rhetoric against the Jews is one of the main reasons that my Jewish friends today don't trust Christianity. Now they're learning to work with Christians because they realize that biblically thinking Christians can be their greatest allies. But I have one friend, I said, look, you look at the Old Testament prophecies, you're an expert on all of these things, you know all these Christians, you know all about Jesus, you know the arguments for the resurrection. So why don't you say that Jesus is the Messiah? And he said, I'm waiting to see if Christians are for real. Okay, that's fair. I get it. I mean, I wish he didn't say that, but I understand. If I knew that I was being asked to pair up with someone who their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents back 2,000 years all hated people like me, I might be a little suspicious. So that, I think we just have to recognize that is kind of a big part, and I think our Reformed brothers and sisters, look, I came up Presbyterian. I can't tell you how much it breaks my heart when I hear my Presbyterian brothers and sisters say, it's all about the church now, the Jews are irrelevant. To me, I just don't see any way you can read scripture. And I'm not just talking about the prophetic books, because those are, quite clear that there are prophecies that were fulfilled in Jesus. There are prophecies that were fulfilled in the New Testament church times. There are prophecies that have been fulfilled since, and there are prophecies that are yet to be fulfilled. And you can't just say, well, it's all a metaphor. It isn't, because they're actual literal fulfillments of prophecy. I wonder when theologians are going to get around to the business of updating their theology to account for the fact that Israel actually claims to be a Jewish state.
Yeah, they're not covering that in seminary, apparently.
I don't think they are. No, they're not talking about it. I mean, they're talking about it as if Martin Luther was the last person who had anything to say about Israel. And John Calvin said it's a spiritual metaphor, because it was when he was writing. But then when a new nation comes into place, whose divine constitution is literally the book of Deuteronomy, and claims to be a Jewish state, and embraces Jewish values and core Jewish teachings as given in the Torah, I don't think you can say, oh, they're fakers. Because that's imposing your old theology on something new that God may be doing.
You mentioned propaganda over the past 100 years or so that's anti-Israel. There seems to be a wave of propaganda that's pro-Hamas over the past decade, maybe more specifically 5 years, more specifically the past maybe 2 or 3 years. What are some tools? What are some ways that we can teach not only our kids, but our community the truth and the facts about who Hamas really is and combat that propaganda that we see everywhere?
Okay, I'm going to give you 2 ways. One you're probably expecting, one you're probably not. One way is to just literally read what Hamas says about itself. Okay, this is not a conspiracy. Well, if it is, it's a conspiracy of ignorance on the part of people who don't bother to understand what Hamas says it is all about. When they were first formed as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, they wrote out all of their beliefs. Very clear, very explicit. We want every Jew dead. We believe that's what Muhammad taught in the Quran. And we're going to do that, and then they outline exactly how they're going to go about doing it. They updated their document in 2017. The only thing they did was take out the quotation of the verse from the Quran, which says, find every Jew and slaughter them. So you have to understand something about Islam. You have to understand something about why we call these people radical Muslims. You have to understand what Hamas is set about to do, why it exists, what its end goal is, which is the elimination of the state of Israel and the annihilation of the Jewish people. Once you understand all of that, and that they're willing to use any techniques, torture, murder, I don't know if you've been watching this, but even as Hamas was releasing these Israeli hostages, which, you know what, if they had done it 2 years ago minus 2 weeks, there would never have been a war. I mean, you realize that.
Yes.
They released them, all males. There were no living female hostages who were released last week. And I think you know why. But they are willing to use rape, torture, murder, terror, and they do this to their own people. I mean, Amnesty International and the Human Rights Campaign are not friends of Israel, but they will tell you there is no freedom of press in Gaza. There's no freedom of speech. You know, this is a horror show that Hamas has produced. Just look at what Hamas says about itself. The second thing is go back to the sources of who is behind the anti-Israel protests in the UK, the United Nations, and a handful of other nations in the world. You know what's weird? I've never seen an anti-Israel protest in Palestinian territory that I've seen on U.S. college campuses. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Palestinians don't themselves do what these people do. So what do? And I feel like if you experience propaganda, if you can reveal the sources behind it, it takes away a lot of the weight. It kind of sucks out the energy from it. First, you need to understand that the people who lead these protests are paid protesters. There's a guy named Adam Swart. He kind of blew the whistle on this. He runs a company, a PR company called Crowds on Demand. So if you want to have a protest, you can pay Adam, give him the money, then he will turn around and hire the protesters. Protest leaders, by the way, get $46 an hour, so it's not a bad way to make a living. He said after October 7th, he received more than 100 requests from anti-Israel organizations, including several that he said were multi-million dollar offers to provide protesters to gin up protests against Israel. And he says that he turned those contracts down. But those protest leaders were found other places. If you've ever wondered why the person holding the megaphone not only has a Hamas sticker on there, they also have an LGBTQ sticker on there and also have a BLM sticker on there. It's because they're the professional who knows how to shout things through a megaphone to get people riled up. And I've met some of these people. I mean, I've actually talked with them. They do not want dialogue. They want to yell, and they are professionals at it. They literally go from protest to protest with their megaphone, just trying to gin up hatred, primarily of the United States, but Israel as a proxy. The third thing you've got to do is look at the funding behind these groups. Who's actually doing it? And again, this is not hard to do. You can just look at the signs. At the bottom of every sign, there's a website. And you just go to that website and you can see exactly what they believe. 90% of the organization in the protests explicitly on their website Marxist-Leninist communist organizations. You know exactly where they're coming from and exactly why they're doing what they're trying to do. The other 10% are groups like Churches for Middle East Peace that are funded by the Foundation for Middle East Peace, which gets its money from places like TAR, which is anti-Israel. So it all goes back to that. And if you can learn to identify, why do they say this? Where are they coming from? What's the worldview behind it? And then you realize it's our worldview. It's like sucking the oxygen out of the room. And that really does help.
Which is why we do these podcasts, right? That's why we interview you. That's why we have the Deeper podcast, to help combat the propaganda, to expose the truth, to put it out there, for some critical thinking across the board.
Exactly. Yeah. And let me say one thing, because I know this podcast there's some people who are getting really torqued right now. And I'm okay with that, because there are times where I get torqued. I don't want to ever believe that I have fallen victim to propaganda. I'm not sure that everybody realizes a lot of them are not falling victim to propaganda. We started just examining key photographs of these different protests. And the one main thing you notice, besides people holding up pre-made signs with websites on there, is that most of the people there are just holding up their cameras and taking selfies. Why are they doing that? Because they have to prove that they're a righteous person, because they don't believe in God. They're not going to go to the church to try to find redemption. They go out into the streets. They post a picture on their social media of themselves at the protest to prove that they're righteous. It is, but you'll just see it, just selfie, everywhere you look. That's the main thing. I think most people are there not because they genuinely hate Israel or genuinely understand what the Palestinians are up to, but just because this seems like a righteous cause. It's as good as any other. I'll show up, take a picture of myself, post it on my social media, and that is my cleansing. And I think I could say a lot more about that, but that displays probably more than anything else that most people just not that knowledgeable. There was one poll done of one group of protesters and chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. 50% of the people in the crowd could not name either the river or the sea they were even chanting about.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me flip the script then from back into Christian tribes.
Yeah.
We spent the last 5 years, in fact, the very birth of this podcast was Mo and I trying to provide information during the COVID era, sorting through fact and fiction. And we have a lot of people in our church family that are here because we opened really quickly after we didn't fold like a napkin. And by the way, I have a lot of empathy for all churches during that time because it was complicated. I have less empathy right now because the Bible is the Bible, and if we're going to have a biblical worldview, I have a lot less patience for torturing the scriptures. Yeah. But the thing that I'm hearing from, and by the way, specifically, this is all anecdotal, but a lot of the same kinds of moms that were looking for information on COVID and facts about masks, some of those same moms. And I'm trying to delineate between, there are some that they're not looking for a conversation, they're looking for capitulation, and I'm not interested in that. But there are those that are genuinely saying, how do I know what's true? They're searching and by the way, damaging their own lives and the anxiety it's bringing on themselves. It damages their children because they're so just stressed all the time. But for some reason, that's happening a lot in the Israel conversation. And we've been able to bring clarity. I've gotten lots of positive response in between the accusations of, being bought off. A lot of thank you for the clarity. What advice do you have for people that are genuinely seeking truth, not trying to confirm their bias, but just genuinely want to know what's going on? This is what you teach kids. Their parents need to know this too. Do you have a tip, 2 tips for where do we go to suss this information out?
That's a different question than I thought you were going to ask. Sorry, it caught me off guard there for a second. So what sources?
No, I wouldn't. No, I see why you would think that. No, not even necessarily sources, but how do you decide which rabbit holes you're going to? How do you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe this will help. This is the secret sauce of how we do this at Summit. You got to train people to recognize the truth. How are you going to do it? The first thing is 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to be obedient to Christ. Get off your social media, learn how to study God's word. And by the way, studying God's word does not mean just picking out a verse that supports your current agenda.
Yeah.
It means understanding the whole counsel of God. Right, Mo?
That's a nail on the head right there.
The whole counsel of God. You got to understand that what you believe about God and Scripture will determine what you believe about everything else. If your thoughts about God and Scripture are not well-formed or well-informed, then it's going to become more fragmented the further you go into politics, economics, law, and so forth. The second thing is to not be taken captive, Colossians 2:8. Recognize that there are false worldviews out there that have been specifically designed and cultivated to try to destroy people's belief in God. A Marxist worldview, for example. Understand that there are counterfeit worldviews. Just like people try to pass counterfeit $100 bills into the currency. The whole point is to devalue the currency by injecting fakery into it. There are counterfeit worldviews that are attempting to destroy the truth. So you got to recognize what those views are so that you're not taken captive by them. And then third, you got to figure out how to talk about this with your kids and with everybody else. So we say, take every thought captive, don't be taken captive. And then the third one is set the captives free. 2 Timothy chapter 2. The Lord's servant must not quarrel, but must be gentle to everyone, able to teach and patient, instructing his opponents with gentleness. Perhaps God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth. Then they may come to their senses and escape the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to his will. You start with that. You got to learn how to talk about these issues. You got to learn to ask questions. I tell parents, here's how I think of it as a dad. I call it cueing conversation. Cue, C-U-E. C, be curious. Tell me how you arrived at that view. How did you come to accept that that's true? What happened to you that causes you to see yourself the way you do? Be curious. You is to understand. Just show that you understand. For example, a lot of people say, I feel really gender insecure. I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl. Maybe I'm actually a girl in a boy's body. And then you want to be able to say, you know what? When I was your age, 14, I was starting to go through puberty and I felt like I was losing myself. Like I couldn't figure out who I was. I thought there's got to be something wrong with me. Fortunately, there were older adults who helped me realize every single human being who has ever lived has to go through this. This is your process of becoming a man or becoming a woman. And the character that you develop during this time will serve you for the rest of your life. Okay? Use understanding. And then finally, E is envision, to envision a different world. I see you as the kind of person who won't just settle for answers that you see on TikTok, but you'll actually search out the truth. So curiosity, understanding, and envisioning help you become the kind of person who communicates well about these issues. Did that?
Yeah, that's actually a perfectly formed answer to a poorly formed question.
No. So because I was thinking, what are my sources?
Yeah,
and all this because it is hard to find reliable sources of information for sure.
It is, and that's the thing that I know that we're dealing with is we were lied to about so many things. Don't believe with your own eyes what you're seeing, and so some of what's happening right now, I think, is a good thing if we can give a framework for. And here's how we can approach that. Instead of letting the world interpret the word, we let the word interpret the world. Let me ask you this question. We're getting close to wrapping up, but why does Satan hate Israel so doggone much?
You guys have read C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters. I recommend people read that. It will help you understand the counterfeit worldviews of our day. If you spend a little bit of time, as uncomfortable as it is, trying to understand why Satan thinks the way he does. So in this situation, it's very time bound. I honestly think that Satan's I think he looks at the United States and he sees, wow, lots of those people are Christians. Lots of those people They adopt kids at 3 or 4 times the rate of secular people. They give money like crazy. U.S. Christians give more money to the overseas poor than the United States federal government gives. Just Christians. You got all these people who are doing things to try to do what is good for the world. They're good neighbors. They don't go in their neighbors' houses and steal stuff. They don't burn down the local store when they're mad. You cannot, if you're Satan, rule the world if you have all of these people who actually live out what they believe. So you have to somehow destroy that. You have to destroy and tear down the United States of America, which, and I know probably this will torque even more people off, but I do think, and at least 20 different objective lines of factual reasoning, that the United States is one of the greatest. The existence of the United States has produced more good in history than just about anything else. And you would want to destroy that if you're Satan. So how are you going to do it? And I think you can, if you were to try to reverse your thinking and think from Satan's perspective, you would go back and say, well, if you're going to destroy the United States, you got to somehow destroy the things that the United States cares about. You got to remove the support that they have from around the world. Then you have to destroy them morally. You have to get them to base their worldview on hate rather than loving their neighbor and so forth. And I think that explains a whole lot of what's going on. So I'm imagining this picture in my mind. It's going to be super hard to communicate it verbally. But for a presentation recently, I came up with a map of the countries in the world, just a world map, countries in the world that have religious freedom, where you are, at least theoretically, allowed to worship the God of your choice. And it is half of the countries in the world. Then I said, here's a map of the countries in the world that have religious freedom that also have political freedom. And the number of countries drops in half. And I said, here are the countries of the world that have religious freedom and political freedom that also have economic freedom. It drops in half again. And then I said, here are the countries of the world that have religious freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, where a majority of the citizens still say that morality comes from God. And I put that map up on the world. It is 2 countries out of 193 countries of the world. The United States of America and South Korea. That is it. And the leadership of South Korea is taking that nation away, trying to take them off that map as quickly as they possibly can. It's just the United States that's left. And we're barely hovering. I mean, it's barely 50% of the people who say that morality goes back to God. So everything that we can do to communicate the truth, even if only 1% of people even hear it, is in a way providing light to the world at a really critical time.
Jeff, in the quickest hour of podcast we've ever had, you gave us some really tangible tips and some clarity that I really appreciate. Can you, as we do wrap this thing up, share your website, share about your ministry, what exactly it is that you guys do, and so that we can point people to your resources?
Yes, our organization is called Summit Ministries. Our website is summit.org. At summit.org, you'll find that we have 2 tracks that we run on. One is events. We host events for young adults primarily, but also events for adults, teachers, influencers, but young adults primarily. And our goal is to equip them and support them to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. So we have an instructor corps of 65 instructors, people like Dr. Frank Turek, who wrote the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. People like Dr. Sean McDowell, Dr. Kathy Cook, an educational psychologist, Dr. Christopher Yuan, who is one of the key authors on holy sexuality and helping a confused generation understand God's design for gender and sexuality. It's people like that coming together, and then a group of students will come together. They listen to lectures. They get to have Q&A sessions. They have small groups. They have one-on-one mentoring. all for the purpose of helping prepare them to be the kind of leaders we desperately need for these times. Any young adult, 16 to 22, who is a learner. Now, if you say, I don't want to learn from you people, I've already decided all my opinions and I have a closed mind. And some it's probably not for you, because you have to be a learner. You have to be willing to be open to understanding Scripture and how God reveals Scripture. You have to be open to recognizing that once you understand God in Scripture, that is going to have an effect on how you value life, how you value marriage, all of these kinds of things. The second track that we run on is curriculum. So for churches, Christian schools, homeschool co-ops, even now, students in 12 states and 300 public schools study our curriculum.
It's great.
They get out of school an hour every day to study Summit Ministries curriculum. And they all do it because they're like, the administrator of our school doesn't really want you to take an hour off to go study this. And they're all like, well, how do we do it? How do I set it up? So it's a lot of fun. And those young adults might never come to our places here in Manitou Springs, Colorado, or Lookout Mountain, Georgia, but they will have the opportunity to ask big questions and seek God's answers. Try to find the truth. Look at the facts of the situation. Try to understand Scripture and let it open itself up in your heart and even more so in your mind.
Well, we're grateful for your ministry. A lot of our parents have sent their kids to Summit camps. We're actually implementing one of your curriculums for one of our deeper courses for middle schoolers. And yeah, like I said, I've had just a small chance to, be at the little kids' table for a couple of sessions. And what's been amazing to me to see, and I'm so grateful for it, is for years, curriculum that's been handed out in churches and Sunday mornings, it separates it into like Bible stories. And in fact, there was one major curriculum that so many mega churches were using that it was crazy what was being. It was like a Trojan horse into the church.
Right.
And knowing that there are resources out there, that someone's done the work, because it is work. You guys didn't just sit down on a whiteboard. This is decades of work and energy all put into this. And so as a father, thank you. As a pastor, thank you. We're grateful because the generation that's coming up right now, you've seen all the statistics of kids coming to Christ in record numbers. They certainly need good teaching to back up in their discipleship, right, with it. And so thank you. Exactly. And thanks for being here today.
Man. Well, Darren, thank you. And Mo, thanks. I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you being willing to put tough questions on the table. That really means a lot. And that tells me the value of what people receive when they're part of Conduit Church. Our team, as you know, has been there a number of times. Remember the time everybody came over and had a bunch of Christian musicians there? And,
yeah.
Man, it's fun. It was, and they're going out and doing videos and doing concerts with millions and millions of people, just the people who were in that room, and having the chance to equip them with a biblical worldview is fun. But yeah, just because somebody's a kid doesn't mean they're dumb.
Right.
Just because they're little, just because they don't have as many years of experience as you, they have big questions. And they want people to take them seriously. And when you do, then they rally around, not only you, but then they realize, wait, okay, the church does have answers for these big questions. Jesus does care about this stuff that's going on in the culture around me. And that gives them inspiration for being with their friends and going to school and being on their sports teams and all those kinds of things. It's an essential part of leadership development for the rising generation.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your time. Hopefully we get to do this maybe soon again in the next 6 to 12 months.
Anytime you're available.
List of tough questions on anything, and I'm like a moth to the flame. As soon as I see the tough questions, I'm like, we gotta engage on this.
This is great. Again, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jeff.